Sam, what did you make of Verstappen's performance? He won by about 22 seconds in the end.
Yeah, I mean, Verstappen was on a Verstappen today. The guy, when he gets, the ball between the horns, which is a classic expression and very suited to, obviously, the team that he's with, the man is essentially unstoppable. These conditions we've seen in the past suit Max Verstappen brilliantly. Turkey last time out where Hamilton kind of had the upper hand. He did brilliantly. Verstappen we've seen in previous ones like Germany, Brazil, where Verstappen knows how to handle these awkward conditions between tyre compounds. And it is one of those things that in the long run is going to probably win Verstappen a championship, whether it be this season or in a couple of years' time. These are those kinds of races that you need to be able to take full advantage of what's going on around you and just go off and run your own race. And Verstappen did that perfectly for 99% of the race. The only time he didn't was at one moment where I almost dropped a little bit of unpleasantness in my trousers when on the restart, he was nearly facing the wrong way on the last corner. How on earth is that man still leading by the time we got down to the second corner? I was baffled. I was like, Leclerc is surely going past Verstappen here. There's no way he's got a good run coming out of this corner. Verstappen held him off again. So even when he went through his most difficult part of the race, Verstappen still manages to comfortably get away, hold on, run that race by 20 seconds, even with a red flag and a safety car jeopardising that victory. Verstappen does absolutely everything he needed to do to take home that victory, and deservingly so. He was brilliant from the moment the lights turned green on lap 1 and getting down the inside of both Perez and Hamilton, and I think that move was fair. He put Hamilton out to the side and Hamilton could go back out of it. It was close, but it was just enough. I think Verstappen did a very good move to get the lead of the race there, and it was crucial. It was crucial. Seeing how hard it is to overtake around here and how fast that Mercedes is in a straight line. Verstappen was absolutely on it, and I am pumped if this is what it's going to be like for the rest of the season between those two absolutely brilliant drivers. They are a leap ahead of the rest of the grid.
What did you make of his performance out there today, Harry?
Yeah, I mean, it was almost faultless, wasn't it? Apart from that, what would have been a rather embarrassing spin if had he lost the lead. At the safety car restart, but yeah, he was in great form again, and we know that Red Bull's obviously a quick car. I think we were not surprised because obviously it's Lewis Hamilton, but surprised when Hamilton did bang it on pole yesterday. I think we expected the Red Bulls to be there. I mean, they were only just behind, but yeah, I mean Max was super impressive, and for once it was Hamilton doing the chasing and Hamilton kind of cracking when he's trying to lap Russell. So when was the last time we saw that? So yeah, I think this is set up this year very nicely indeed. I think because yeah, when Hamilton and Verstappen are both on form like they are, no one else is close to them. I mean, we saw Hamilton still made it back up to P2, and yeah, Verstappen was 20 seconds in front, but I don't think because Hamilton was really coming back to the field. So yeah, I think this is going to be Titanic, I would like to say.
Yeah, I mean, qualifying I think proved that. I think, just to go back to Saturday before we talk about Sunday, that was such an epic qualifying session. It was one of the best that I can remember in the last couple of years. Obviously, you didn't just have Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton gunning for pole. You probably had about 7 or 8 that, a few of them were outside chances, but you had the likes of Norris and Leclerc getting involved, and we saw with Q2 how Carlos Sainz was able to be within half a second of the fastest time and also be eliminated. So just to make that point first of all, in terms of the race, despite all of the chaos and carnage that ensued, there was one message that remained prevalent, and that is that track position matters at Imola. Regardless of the amount of incidents that are going on around, that is still the key to win at that circuit. And that's what we saw from Max Verstappen and how he was able to clinch the lead at the start of the Grand Prix. And it was seriously impressive what he did. I was trying to think of the last time a driver from P3 was able to claim the lead essentially into turn 1. I know it's turn 2, really, but into the first braking zone at least. It doesn't happen all that often, and it's not as if the run down to that corner is massive. I mean, it's not a Russia. So yeah, what Verstappen was able to do at the beginning of the race kind of set the tone, And I agree with what you said, Sam, in that the move was fair. It was certainly harsh, but it was fair. And it's one of the hallmarks of all these champions that have come before Verstappen, that they will essentially give the other drivers a choice. You can crash into me if you want, or you can see the position, and more often than not, the other driver is going to take that second option. Hamilton did his absolute best to keep that car alongside, but when it got to the point of we're going to crash, Verstappen held his nerves. So it was definitely a good move. I don't want to say in any way that Verstappen was lucky, because it was an exceptional performance out there. I feel as if he got slightly fortunate in terms of the timing of the red flag, because that seemed to be the worst point in Verstappen's race. Again, it's, his race was exceptional, so it's not as if his worst point was bad, but he was definitely better suited to full-on intermediate conditions and full-on dry conditions. And for whatever reason, he didn't quite seem to have that same advantage in that middling bit where they were still on intermediate tyres, but the track was drying very significantly. Because not only was Hamilton catching quite rapidly before he went off into the gravel, it was even like Charles Leclerc was catching Max Verstappen at one point. I haven't got the exact gaps in front of me, but there was one point where a 20-second lead went to about 15 seconds or so between Leclerc and Verstappen, P1 to P3 at that point. So, that was probably his worst point in the race, and that was cut short because of the red flag, and by the time they got back out there, it was pretty much bone dry. So, not quite bone dry, but it was enough of a dry line that it didn't really matter that it had been raining earlier in the race. So there was that element to it. Again, don't want to take anything away from his performance. And that last stint that he put together was absolutely epic. Regardless of Hamilton having to fight back through the field, the gap that he was able to build out on Lando Norris and the rest of the field, again, considering how close they were in qualifying, that was a really epic stint from him, and he fully deserved the race win out there. And we did mention that obviously Lewis Hamilton, whilst he was chasing, I think he got to about 2 seconds or so when he made that error going into the hairpin, trying to overtake George Russell on the inside of the corner, went off into the gravel, hit his front wing as he was trying to get going, did eventually get going, and then of course the red flag intervened very shortly after that. Not a characteristic error from him, Sam.
No. And what was very funny was in the pre-race interviews, both Lando Norris and Max Verstappen spoke about how Lewis Hamilton is obviously their biggest challenge, regardless of who they're racing. He's a 7 times world champion, and you have to do a lot to become a 7 times world champion. But they both said 7 times world champions still do make mistakes. They learn from them, they grow from them, and they have the ability to recover in the race from them. But they do make those mistakes. And funny enough, in that race there, Lewis Hamilton dives quite unnecessarily down the inside of George Russell. He rushes that move, which I don't think he needs to do with half the race left to go. Gets onto a wet patch of the track, slides straight off into the gravel. Very reminiscent of what happened in Germany, in Hockenheim, I think 2018, when it was very, very wet on that drag strip on the outside of the track. Couldn't get going again in the gravel for a moment. Did brilliantly well, to be fair, under the pressure to reverse it through the gravel, get back onto the track safely, drag the car back round to the pits without damaging anything further, and then, you know what, his teammate happened to save him with a red flag collision with Russell, because otherwise he would have been long gone out of the points. He'd have been a lap down, there'd be no chance of him getting back on that podium, let alone second place. But that is the thing. Yes, you get a little bit of luck on your side, but he still had to move past the majority of the top 10 to get himself into second place and keep himself in the league of the championship. And that's the hallmark of one of the greatest of all time, isn't it? You screw up, you realise you've screwed up, you apologise to your team, and then in 15 laps' time, you're in second place again and you're still leading the championship. That is the difference between Lewis Hamilton and a lot of drivers. Valtteri Bottas was being overtaken by the likes of Lance Stroll and was being caught by George Russell in a Williams for 90% of his Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton winning ninth place and overtook 7 people in front of him. The only person left, of course, being Max Verstappen. It tells you the difference. It was a silly mistake from him. He didn't need to rush that, but he recovered brilliantly. And I think second place was probably the best he was going to get out of it. There was a chance he could make a move when he was gaining on Verstappen, but Red Bull had it covered. It was a great strategy call from them. Verstappen was on top form. I think Hamilton can be very pleased to walk away with second place today after that silly mistake.
What do you reckon, Harry? First of all, about the incident itself, but also about the fight back that he had to endure.
Yeah, I mean, as I already said, it's incredibly rare to see Hamilton make that kind of mistake. I think it was just a combination of, you mentioned earlier, Ben, Verstappen having that quite weak middle part of that race, and he was being caught quite quickly whilst they were trying to lap traffic, and obviously Hamilton's trying to take advantage of that and just got caught out by the damp patch going into Tosa. But I think if you told him at that point, whilst he was sat in the gravel trap at Tosa hairpin, that you were still going to finish P2, he'd have told you to go away, you're being stupid. But I think as we come to expect from Hamilton, we don't expect those mistakes, but we still expect him to be able to recover from them well. I think in the same way that Verstappen was fortunate with the red flag, I think so was Hamilton in that respect, because as Sam said, he'd been nowhere, but he still had to go and make those moves, and as we saw, overtaking is still tricky. A lot of drivers got it wrong, quite a lot. So, it was still pretty impressive to be able to come back and claim P2, and also still have the lead of the championship going into round 3. So, good old Hamilton.
Good old Hamilton. He knows what he's doing. I mean, I think this race was actually decided by not necessarily who made mistakes and who didn't. It was more a case of when you made those mistakes and how that impacted the Grand Prix. We saw nearly all of the drivers make at least some sort of misdemeanor out there today. Some much worse than others. But if you were to compare, Hamilton's incident to, say, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but this wasn't even an incident from a driver, but take Giovinazzi, for example, who had to come into the pits, wasn't expected to adjust the car. Again, obviously not an error by Giovinazzi, but because at that point the entire grid had been bunched up, that incident was so much more costly. Actually, the Perez one is probably the best example. When Perez went off after his spin, again, at that point, the field had been contracted so much that it was actually quite a costly incident. Compare that to the likes of Carlos Sainz, who made about 5 mistakes, none of which lost him any positions, and Lewis Hamilton, significantly, where he had a massive error and was, as you rightly say, Sam, very much saved by Valtteri Bottas, because if that doesn't come along, I don't know what position he recovers to. It's definitely not P2. I think it was a case of when you make the error rather than if you make the error. Whether you believe that there is skill involved in that or not, I'll leave that up to you. But Lewis Hamilton's fight back, I think, was good. I don't think it was anything special, to be quite frank, because he did what he had to do in a faster car than the guys in front. You can say that Valtteri Bottas disappointed in the same car in a similar position, which I think there is some merit to that. At the same time, Lewis Hamilton didn't make any moves without DRS, and he was stuck behind Lance Stroll for about 4 laps or so when he didn't have the DRS. As soon as he got it, he made the move, and every move thereafter again was using that DRS. Bottas didn't have that at his disposal midway through the race, so I think the comparison, whilst it holds some weight, it doesn't hold all the weight. I think Lewis Hamilton did a good enough job after that point. It was an error that we aren't used to seeing from him. We talk about his consistency all the time actually being his greatest trait rather than his outright pace. It's something I mention quite a lot. And as you say, when they were speaking to the likes of Norris on the grid before, it does prove that even these sorts of drivers will occasionally make these sorts of mistakes. How they're so good is because they limit them, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's Hamilton's last mistake in about a dozen races. That's what we've become accustomed to seeing from him. So he'll be very happy that in a race where he made such a massive error, he's walked away with 19 points. That's pretty good going. And even with Verstappen taking the victory, I'm sure he's going to be very happy about that, and rightly so. I think there is going to be something niggling in the back of his mind saying, wow, I should not have claimed a 6-point advantage over my rival today. That should have been way more. And whilst Max Verstappen did have a very, very good race and took the victory, he was the only Red Bull driver that scored points out there, even after being out-qualified by Sergio Perez. Perez started on the front row of the grid for the first time in his career, and then it kind of derailed from there. He picked up a 10-second stop-go penalty for overtaking under the safety car after he made an error. He then made an error later on in the Grand Prix, which docked him down outside the top 10, at which point he was stuck in a DRS train and couldn't move forward. So, Sam, what did you make of Perez's weekend? Because there were definitely pluses and minuses to it.
When we finished Saturday and Perez sat there on the front row in front of Max Verstappen, I said out loud to the TV, as I quite often do, folks. If you watch the TV with me, I like to talk to the telly. I'm quite annoying that way. I said to the TV, have that, Max. We've got a fight on our hands. Because I thought, here we go. Sergio Perez has turned up. He's got hold of the car. He's had a bit of time. He's had a race to get to grips with it. And he's good. He's good to go. You know, we're going to start seeing those consistent performances that we're so the same as Lewis Hamilton. Consistency for Sergio Perez has always been his greatest trait. Eking out that little bit more of the car, a little bit longer than the guys around him. He's always able to do that. So when we came into this race today, I thought, even if Sergio Perez falls behind Max Verstappen and finishes one place behind Verstappen, great race for Perez. He's doing exactly what Red Bull needed to do. This was a shocker, and it was all brought on by Sergio Perez. That's the problem. The problem was he went into this today and he screwed it up for himself. He dropped it under the safety car, which is appalling to do, really. So many other drivers of younger capability, less experience, were able to keep it together quite comfortably. Then re-overtook. You should know the rules. You know, you've been in the sport long enough. You should know that that's a rule. That you can't jump straight back into those places and keep them, fair and square. He should have stuck behind and overtaken properly on track or waited for a team order to swap something round from the FIA. That was silly. He got lucky it wasn't a full stop-and-go penalty that he just had to serve it in a pit stop. But then again, bings it later on in the gravel under normal racing conditions when everyone else on different formats of tyres, different teams, different struggles are able to keep going normally. Finishes outside the points behind a lot of slower drivers. It's not good enough from Perez. That isn't good enough. I'm not going to start jumping to silly, drastic conclusions that, Perez needs to get out the seat. He's not good enough. But this was a bad weekend in terms of final results for Sergio Perez. And if he doesn't turn it round in 4, 5, 6 races' time, and we still see him making these silly mistakes, we still see these problems occurring, then yes, I think you're fair to start asking a few questions. But right now, this was just a bad race weekend for a driver. Let's not jump into, but what about Gasly? But what about Albon? They all had their own criticisms. We all gave them the fair amount of time. Perez still needs that time. But you have to still be critical, and this was a bad race for him. So I'm not impressed by Perez here. Hopefully he can turn it around next time.
Robert Doornbos in, Harry? What do you reckon?
I mean, always. I need to do like the Twitter meme with their shaking hands, and it's like Red Bull second seat drivers and the Villeneuve chicane spinning, because that's what they seem to do. It was a messy race for Checo. I think that Red Bull, and I think we should take a lot of encouragement from his quality performance yesterday, because that was the first time Max has been out qualified by a teammate since Danny Rick was in the team. It was a really uncharacteristic race for Perez as well. We're really used to him sweeping up the points in those kind of situations. It was not great on any level. The re-overtaking the cars under the safety car was like a rookie error. Like, he's been around long enough to know you can't do that. So I thought that was strange. I thought it was strange they didn't tell him to give the places back as well. But maybe they just didn't have time. I'm not sure. And then it just kind of compounded from there. He'll want to forget today, absolutely. But I don't think it's all bad from this as a whole. I don't think this weekend is all bad. I think he's shown some really good pace, which will encourage Red Bull massively. He just needs to have a cleaner weekend, like a whole weekend that's clean this time, rather than just one good day. So next time, third time lucky for Checo, I reckon.
Yeah, in terms of a result, obviously it's a negative this weekend. In terms of what happened, sure. In terms of encouragement, though, I actually think this was an okay weekend. I think this was a good weekend in that respect, and it definitely wasn't shown in the result. But I think Red Bull need to look past that and actually look at the positives here. It was definitely not a very good race for Sergio Perez, but I don't think it was as bad as what it looked. First of all, the incident under the safety car. I'm more concerned that he overtook the cars than he did make the incident, because we saw Alonso bin it on the on the parade lap. We saw Charles Leclerc bin it on the formation lap. So I don't actually care too much about him binning it behind the safety car in those conditions. Obviously, it's not great, but at the same time, I don't think it's unforgivable. I don't think it's unforgivable. But him not knowing the rules after being in Formula One for 10 years, that's a bit more worrying. And again, surprised he wasn't told to give those spots back straight away. And then in terms of the incident later on in the Grand Prix, specifically that spin at the Villeneuve chicane, again, I do think that was an incident that was made worse due to timing. I think if that happens on lap 25 or lap 20 when he's got a 10-second advantage or however much it was over the car behind, it's very much an incident like we saw from Carlos Sainz, where he spins off, he recovers, and he doesn't lose a spot, and no one really thinks anything of it. I do think the timing did make it look a bit worse than what it was. You were much better off making those sorts of errors in the first stint than you were in the second stint. And in terms of, I think what supersedes all of that, actually, what supersedes the result, what supersedes that performance, is that qualifying show that he put on Saturday. Because, Max Verstappen has technically been out-qualified twice since Ricciardo left, although both of those incidents were not really on pace. He was out-qualified on pace. Yes, Max Verstappen made an error on his final lap. He was a couple of attempts slower in the first sector than he would have liked to have been. I think if he pulls together a good lap, Max Verstappen is probably on pole by about 3 tenths or so. Even so, he made the error and Perez was there to capitalise on it. I think it was a really good showing from him, and I think the encouragement of that is actually more important than the lack of a result on a Sunday, because they'll come. I have no doubt about that. They knew what they were getting with Perez, and I've never really rated him as a wet driver. I don't think he's one of the best in that respect. I think he's far better in dry conditions. So if you know what you're getting and you know that these sorts of races are going to come along once in a while, then you have to be prepared for a bad result or two. I wouldn't be concerned if I'm Red Bull. Driver of the day. Who have you got, Sam?
For me, there was a lot of mistakes, so it was very easy to pick a worse driver of the day. Of course, we'll get onto that momentarily. For me, driver of the day, I have to actually, for the first time it feels like in a long time, agree with the Formula One fan base. Lando Norris, for me, is driver of the day. The last stint that he pulled together. Let's start from this. Just tell a story, shall we? He obviously, on the Saturday, had the issue where he delivered a fantastic lap. Shall I start like it's a fairy tale? He delivered that fantastic lap, and then the evil FIA smited him by removing that lap. Boo, says the crowd. I'll hold the card up so you can all boo. But a new dawn approached, and Lando Norris, our hero, rode his orange steed around the Italian countryside.
Yeah!
Hooray! Screamed the children. And the fact that he was able to carve through difficult weather, he was able to... That moment where the team orders were given, the overseers of the McLaren industry told the Australian brother to move aside. And you saw... Thank you, Ben, for the constant support in this story. And Lando said, I can go faster. I'm being held up right now. And our hero delivered a 4-second gap in the space of 2 laps. It's a wonderful thing. Over the rainbow he goes, as they had painted on their halo. And to deliver that 3rd place in front of our 2 protagonists of the story, Hamilton and Verstappen sitting in front of him, and the 2 evil Ferraris, the hometown favourites of the Italian countryside, sat behind on those tyres that had worn down and down and down. It was a fantastic drive. He delivered a fantastic drive. It was so promising from him and from McLaren. And I think Ricciardo, I can't believe I'm saying this after what happened at the start, and Ben, you are completely correct in this. Ricciardo needs to be a little bit worried. Lando Norris is on it this season. We only had 2 races, but that was a brilliant performance from the young Brit, and I hope he does that for the rest of the season because I loved it. So, Norris, driver of the day.
Who was your driver of the day, Harry?
I actually agree with Sam, but for the sake of some variety, I'll give it to Max Verstappen. Yeah, like I said, it wasn't quite faultless, but it was near as damn it. And yeah, I don't need to say much more. He, won the race by a big margin in the end. So yeah, I'll give it to Max, but yeah, Norris is up there too.
Yeah, for me there were 3 contenders, and you've already said 2 of them. Max Verstappen was exceptional. The 22-second win speaks for itself, especially considering that was essentially 0 seconds or very close to 0 seconds after the red flag period, which was halfway through the race. So it's a massive lead accumulated over, I think, about 29 laps or so. Really impressive. Lando Norris did a great job. We'll speak more about this in a little bit, so I won't talk too much on him, but the pace advantage he had on Ricciardo was scary after he was allowed to overtake Ricciardo when they switched positions. Not for the sake of variety, but for the sake of actually me thinking it, I'm going to go with God Leclerc on this one.
Classic.
Let's just hypothesize for a moment. Let's just say that the red flag doesn't happen. Leclerc finishes second by an absolute mile. Leclerc probably finishes second by a pit stop over P3, which would have been Lando Norris. And I don't want to take away what happened in Lando Norris's final stint because it was really impressive. The only way that could have happened was with a red flag, whereas Charles Leclerc was P2 on merit on that first stint. He did such a good job. So I want to reward that here with the driver of the day. I will also say as well, in terms of the setup and in terms of the Mercedes power unit, unless Lando Norris made an error in that final stint, Leclerc or Sainz was not getting past. As fast as that Ferrari was in the final stint, in the final sector particularly, that McLaren had such an advantage down the straight that unless the Ferrari was within about 2 or 3 tenths, I think at that point the DRS might have been enough. But other than that, I don't think there was any chance. Compare that to, say, Hamilton when he got past Norris. I think it was about 7.5, possibly 8 tenths at the start of that DRS zone. Charles Leclerc was in that sort of range plenty of times, but he didn't have that same straight line speed. So, again, you have to give Norris the credit for taking the position straight away, and I think it was a good strategic call from McLaren to actually put him on the soft tyres to allow him to do that. But yeah, I think this was those 3 were head and shoulders above the rest. For me though, God Leclerc put in a great performance. Really unlucky not to get on the podium, and really unlucky to not have my bold prediction come true.
Sorry, mate.
Anyway, worst driver of the day. Who have you got for this one, Sam?
There are an array of drivers that were poor, and Valtteri Bottas will cheer his lucky stars off that he's once again, for the second race in a row this season, just scraped out of not being called the worst driver of the day, because I know it was shocking. It was bad from Valtteri Bottas. I expect a lot more from him, and that's 2 races in a row now where he's grossly disappointed. I feel bad for saying it. I'm going to give it to Latifi. The guy does well on Saturday. It looks really promising. Williams look like they, if things go their way, they could get a double point score at this point here. We've seen DNFs happen around Imola before. Last time out, we had some problems. There is every chance that if you are on the cusp of those points, you can move up due to other drivers' mistakes. And at the start of that Grand Prix with those weather conditions, I bet Williams was sat there going, we keep it together, we are in with a chance of scoring some points here. Look at some of the drivers that did make it into there after the races that they had. I think both Russell and Latifi could have got into there. We'll talk about the Russell crash on the podcast, folks, if you're interested. But for me, Latifi, he had that first spin initially, which put him in the gravel trap in the middle of the second sector. And then just to come back on the track with the way he did, which was ridiculously dangerous. He did not check his mirrors properly. There was a car, it was Mazepin, who got an initial blame for him. I can't believe I'm defending Mazepin, but he got the initial blame for it because Mazepin was there, and Mazepin did spin in the race on his own. It was just towards the end. He kept it for a little bit of flavour. And Latifi just keeps pulling over the track, just keeps pulling over like nothing's there. Like when you're coming up to a bus lane in a merge area, the bus just keeps coming over. You've got to hit the brakes because the bus hasn't looked. That Latifi is the bus in this situation, and Mazepin's like grass or crash. So it was a crash. And it was all Latifi's fault, and it was silly. It was a really, really rookie error, and I'm quite disappointing him. And I think he could have done a lot more there. And it was a silly mistake for Williams, which is a real shame. I think they could have had a lot more from this weekend. So for me, Latifi, worst driver of the day.
The Latifi Bus Company, look out for that one coming soon. Harry, worst driver of the day.
I mean, just to say, it was a real missed opportunity for Team Willie today, wasn't it? Could both have points. Anyway, I'm not going to go for Latifi. I'm struggling to choose between the second seats of Mercedes and Red Bull. I might have to give it to Checo. But Bottas, you've been saved again. Unbelievable.
2 for 2.
Yeah, I just think we've already mentioned it. Checo just had a horrendous day. I guess if it's a weekend overall, I'd probably give it to Bottas because he wasn't very good in quali, and then he wasn't very good in the race either. But based on today, I'll give it to Perez because at least Bottas was still fighting for some points before mega crash.
Mega crash indeed. I think those three names are probably the three that spring to mind here. Bottas, I think it was what you said, Harry. If it was across an entire weekend, I'd probably give it to Bottas. But because it's the race, and only the race, I'm going to give it to Nicholas Latifi like you have, Sam. And probably the most frustrating thing is it was maybe, in terms of practice and qualifying, Latifi's best weekend in a Williams car thus far. He was seriously on it in terms of the pace. In practice, in particular, he was really on it. In qualifying, he makes it through to Q2. George Russell claims the advantage in Q2 as we would expect, but he really showed something there. And then they get to the race, and he makes 2 errors inside 30 seconds in the first lap, and that's done and dusted. And when you are in a Williams, where points are very much at a premium. It's been a long time since Williams have scored any points whatsoever. I mean, you'd have to go back to Robert Kubica at the 2019 German Grand Prix. It's been that long. And these sorts of races are perfect for the likes of Williams to take advantage of it. And they were in a position to do so with George Russell, and they probably would have been in a position to do so with Latifi if he stuck around and limited his mistakes. But the first mistake is okay. The second mistake is a bit less forgivable because he has done the bus treatment to Mazepin. So Latifi for me.